The next aspect of listening is asking open-ended questions, and we'll talk about how to apply that specifically to persuasion. So, in the context of persuasion, we want to use open-ended questions to discover what people believe and why they believe it. Let's say, hypothetically, you think wealth inequality is a big problem in the United States. And so you see there in the upper left, we have a chart showing what the actual wealth inequality in the United States is. However, this chart on the bottom right shows what people think the wealth distribution in America is. And so we can't convince people, or in order to convince people that wealth inequality is a problem, we need to understand how they're seeing the world, and we have to ensure that they're seeing the world accurately. If someone perceives the wealth distribution as it is in the bottom right, and they say that there's not a problem with wealth inequality, well, that might make sense given their perception of the world. So people's conclusions usually make sense given their perceptions of the world. So what's important is understanding their subjective perceptions. How do they see the world around them? The next thing you want to understand is, what is people's ideal situation? Do they want total equality? Do they think that a certain level of inequality is acceptable? How much inequality is acceptable? You want to understand what people's ideals are. And this is probably the hardest thing to change people's minds about. Ideals really get to the core of a person, they get down to what they value. So, a lot of the differences between conservatives and liberals can come down to the fact that these people have very different values. Conservatives tend to value individual freedom, and liberals tend to value fairness, equality. And so if you look at every debate between liberals and conservatives as a debate about individual freedom versus fairness, or individual freedom versus social support, then it starts to make a lot more sense. So you have to understand what people's ideals are, what their values are, before you can convince them of things. And it's very hard to convince people that their values are wrong. The last thing you want to use open-ended questions to explore is, how do we get from point A to point B? How do we get from the current situation to the ideal situation? And even if we agree on what the current situation is and what the ideal situation should be, we might still disagree on how to get there. So, for example, a conservative might argue that it's actually government regulation that is leading to this inequality, and by having more deregulated markets, that will just inevitably create equity, or equitability. A liberal might argue that no, we need more government intervention. So even if we agree on how things are and where they should be, we can still disagree on how to get there. So we ask open-ended questions to explore how people perceive the current situation, what is their ideal situation, and how do we get from the current situation to the ideal situation.